The courtroom falls silent as the doors creak open. A young man, dressed modestly in an old but neatly pressed suit, steps in. His expression remains calm and collected, yet there's something in his eyes, perhaps a quiet resolve or the weight of unspoken truths. As he walks toward the defendant's table, the audience can't help but stare, their gazes filled with disdain and suspicion. Whispers ripple through the room, but Alejandro remains unfazed. Alejandro, at 24, finds himself at the heart of an accusation that threatens to ruin his life. He has led a life of humility, working hard for every bit of his modest existence, always striving to do right by others. Never involved in crime, never out of place. Yet, here he stands, accused of a crime he did not commit. And the eyes of everyone in that courtroom are not just on him. They're sizing him up, passing judgment before the trial even begins. The judge, a man notorious for his skepticism and sharp tongue, looks at him with a mocking smile. His reputation for ridiculing defendants precedes him, and Alejandro knows that he'll have to fight not just for his innocence, but for his dignity. No one in this courtroom knows the real truth about Alejandro. Not yet. This is a story that will challenge your perspective on justice, judgment, and the resilience of the human spirit. Stay with us, for the truth will unfold, and it will change everything you thought you knew. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more impactful narratives like this one. The courtroom buzzes with a low murmur as the judge, Ricardo Salazar, enters. Known for his unwavering sternness and scathing remarks, he immediately commands attention. His reputation as a no-nonsense, often contemptuous judge precedes him. No one dares to question his authority. As he takes his seat, the room falls into an eerie silence. He doesn't look at Alejandro, nor does he seem to acknowledge his presence. Instead, his gaze cuts through the air, surveying the rest of the room with cold indifference. Alejandro, standing at the defendant's table, keeps his eyes forward. His shoulders are straight, and his hands remain steady, though the weight of the situation presses heavily upon him. He has never been in a place like this before, but he refuses to show fear. His family, long gone, would have expected him to hold his head high in the face of adversity. This trial is a far cry from the small life he led. An orphan, someone who had always believed in fairness, in doing what was right. The judge's voice cuts through the air like a blade. Mr. Alejandro Lopez, accused of theft and embezzlement. How do you plead? The words are spoken with a tone of scorn, as though the very thought of this young man standing before him is an inconvenience. Not guilty, Your Honor, Alejandro replies, his voice steady but filled with an inner strength that even he doesn't fully understand. The courtroom seems to gasp in unison, as if they expect him to break under the pressure. But Alejandro doesn't flinch. He simply stands tall, his heart steady in the face of what lies ahead. Judge Salazar eyes him for a moment, as if searching for a sign of weakness. He finds none. Not guilty, you say? Well, we shall see, the judge sneers, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the gavel. The sarcasm in his voice is palpable, and the crowd seems to draw a collective breath in anticipation of what comes next. As the trial officially begins, the prosecutor rises. His sharp suit and practiced voice contrast sharply with Alejandro's simplicity. The prosecutor presents the charges, the evidence, circumstantial, yet damning. Alejandro remains quiet, his gaze fixed ahead, refusing to let his emotions betray him. The judge doesn't help matters, making snide remarks that seem designed to break his composure. Are you just going to stand there, Mr. Lopez, or do you have something to say for yourself? Judge Salazar's voice rings out, dripping with contempt. I have nothing to say, Your Honor, except that I am innocent, Alejandro responds, his words clear and concise. It is not defiance that laces his voice, but conviction, a quiet, unwavering belief in his own truth. The judge lets out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Innocent, he says. We'll see about that. He turns to the prosecutor. Proceed. The first witness is called, a man Alejandro has never seen before. His testimony is filled with accusations, describing how Alejandro was allegedly seen at the crime scene. But Alejandro knows this is false. The man's eyes avoid his gaze, and his story seems rehearsed. Still, the judge doesn't miss a beat. This is the man you claim to have seen. How convenient, Judge Salazar remarks, his voice dripping with skepticism. Alejandro wonders for a moment if the judge even considers the possibility that he might be innocent, or if this is just another case to him, one where judgment has already been passed, long before the evidence is truly examined. As the testimony continues, Alejandro remains calm, absorbing every word, every accusation. His face betrays no emotion, though inside his thoughts race. He knows that the truth is on his side, but it seems like no one is listening. Not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the crowd. It feels as if everyone has already decided who he is, what he's done. But Alejandro also knows that the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how long it takes. The courtroom is thick with tension as the prosecution continues to present their case. The air feels heavier with each passing minute, and Alejandro can almost hear the echo of his own heartbeat. His life is being dissected, scrutinized by strangers who have already made their judgment. The prosecutor's voice grows louder, each word more pointed than the last, as he unveils the so-called evidence against Alejandro. A stack of documents is placed on the table, each page filled with records, financial statements, and transactions that supposedly link Alejandro to a series of fraudulent activities. The prosecutor's hand hovers over each page like a magician, revealing his tricks, calling attention to each detail that he believes will convict Alejandro. These financial records clearly show that the defendant has been embezzling money from the company he worked for, the prosecutor declares, his voice booming across the room. Alejandro's eyes scan the documents briefly, and though his mind races to find any inconsistencies, he remains silent. He knows the truth, that he has never committed such crimes, but the weight of the accusations feels suffocating. He had worked for years as an honest employee, always putting in the effort, always helping others, believing in integrity. How could anyone believe these lies? Judge Salazar watches with a cool, detached gaze. "What do you have to say to this, Mr. Lopez?" His words are pointed, cold. He has already made up his mind. Alejandro knows it. "I did not steal, Your Honor. These records are not mine," Alejandro says calmly, his voice unwavering. The judge raises an eyebrow, a smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, really? And where's your evidence to back that claim?" His voice is laced with mockery, and the courtroom watches, waiting for Alejandro to crumble under the pressure. The prosecutor calls in a second witness, a colleague from the company where Alejandro had worked. The man steps up, eyes avoiding Alejandro's, and his testimony matches the first witness's account, vaguely familiar, but still damning. He swears he saw Alejandro in the office on the day the funds went missing. Alejandro's stomach churns, but he doesn't let the uncertainty show. He knows this is all part of a setup, but how can he prove it? "Your Honor, I am innocent," Alejandro says again, his voice steady but full of resolve. "I don't know why they are saying these things, but I am not guilty." The judge leans forward, his eyes narrowing. "A bold claim, Mr. Lopez, but without evidence it means nothing. You are just another criminal trying to weasel out of responsibility." Alejandro feels the weight of those words, but he doesn't waver. He stands tall, not because he has a defense right now, but because he knows the truth, and the truth, he believes, will come to light. As the prosecution finishes presenting their case, the judge looks at Alejandro, his expression unchanged. "Well, Mr. Lopez, it seems like the evidence is pretty clear. How do you explain all of this?" "I can't explain something I didn't do," Alejandro responds softly but firmly. "I am innocent, and one day the truth will come out." The room falls silent. For a brief moment, Alejandro's words seem to hang in the air, his plea for justice resonating in the hearts of a few. But then the judge, with a dismissive wave, calls for a brief recess. As the room empties, Alejandro can feel the weight of the stares upon him, the whispers that follow him like a shadow. The crowd, the judge, the witnesses, all of them believe the worst. But Alejandro remains calm. His heart beats with quiet determination, knowing that this trial is far from over. There's more to this story, more than anyone could ever imagine, and Alejandro is ready to see it through. As the trial resumes after the brief recess, the atmosphere in the courtroom has shifted. There's a sense of quiet anticipation, as though everyone is waiting for the next twist in the unfolding drama. Alejandro, despite the weight of the accusations against him, maintains his calm composure. His eyes are focused, unwavering. He knows that the truth is more than just a set of documents or witnesses. It's a life he's lived, a history that no one in this room understands. The defense attorney, a seasoned lawyer named Laura Ruiz, stands up to present her opening statements. Her voice is steady, confident, and she begins to outline a story that no one in the room expected. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've heard so far is not the full picture. You've seen accusations, but you have not seen the man who stands before you. The man you are condemning has a past that tells a very different story. She gestures to Alejandro, who sits in silence, his head slightly bowed, as though preparing to reveal something deeply personal. Alejandro Lopez, Laura continues, was raised in a humble orphanage after losing both his parents at a young age. He has spent his life helping others, giving of himself when he had nothing to give. A series of photos is shown on the screen behind her. Images of Alejandro as a child, standing alongside other orphans, his hands wrapped around food, clothes, and other donations meant for those in need. The audience is silent as they take in the images, some appearing surprised, others unsure of what to make of the unexpected shift. Alejandro's story begins to take shape before their eyes. He had always been an idealist, someone who believed that one could change the world, no matter how small the impact. As a young man, Alejandro had worked tirelessly at various jobs, often volunteering at shelters, helping the elderly, and spending nights in community centers, assisting troubled youth. His life had been built on service to others, on doing what was right, no matter the cost. Laura speaks of a specific moment in Alejandro's life, a moment that had defined his character. When he was 18, Laura says, Alejandro found himself working at a local food bank. There he met an elderly man who was struggling with his health. Alejandro took it upon himself to not only help the man with his physical needs, but also stayed with him, helping him write letters to his family and ensuring he wasn't alone in his final days. A few of the jurors exchanged glances, some clearly moved by the story. Alejandro's soft gaze lifts, and for a moment, the courtroom sees not just an accused man, but someone with a deep reservoir of compassion. He had never been a criminal. He was a man of honor, of unwavering faith in the goodness of people. However, Judge Salazar's face remains impassive, his eyes cold. None of that has anything to do with the charges here today, Ms. Ruiz, he interrupts sharply. We are not here to discuss this man's charity work. We are here to determine whether he stole from his employer. Laura doesn't flinch. Your Honor, she replies, the point I'm trying to make is simple. This man's entire life has been dedicated to others. He has never taken from anyone. He is incapable of the crime he is being accused of. The judge's lip curls into a slight sneer. A noble history does not prove innocence, Ms. Ruiz, he mutters under his breath, loud enough for the courtroom to hear. Alejandro doesn't react to the judge's taunt. He knows that his past, his character, will not erase the charges against him in the eyes of the court, but it is part of his story, and no one can take that from him. His past is who he is, and it's more than just the accusations. His life has been about giving, not taking. The defense attorney finishes, leaving the room with a sense of heavy contemplation. It's clear that not everyone in the courtroom is convinced by the sudden shift in narrative, but a few eyes have softened, a few hearts have begun to wonder, could it really be true? Could Alejandro be the man he says he is? Or is this all just a well-crafted defense to cover up his crimes? As the day draws to a close, the courtroom empties, but Alejandro remains seated, deep in thought. He knows the road ahead will be long, and the truth will not be easy to uncover, but one thing is certain: he will not give up. His life, his faith, and his unwavering sense of justice will see him through. The days following the defense's opening statement feel like a blur. The courtroom's mood has shifted. Though Judge Salazar remains as stern and condescending as ever, there are murmurs among the jurors. Some seem troubled by the new information about Alejandro's life, and a few even appear to question the validity of the evidence presented against him. It's not much, but it's a crack, a small opening where doubt begins to seep in. The trial continues, and the prosecution presses on, but Alejandro remains calm. He sits at the defendant's table, his face a mask of quiet determination. Despite the ridicule from Judge Salazar, he does not waver. His mind, however, races, searching for any opening, any piece of the puzzle that might help him prove his innocence. On the fourth day of the trial, something unexpected happens. The prosecution calls a new witness, one that hadn't been mentioned before. A woman enters the courtroom, her eyes downcast, her posture tense. Alejandro doesn't recognize her, but she walks to the stand, and for the first time something feels different. The woman's testimony is shaky at best, yet it shakes the courtroom nonetheless. She claims to have seen Alejandro in the office late on the night the funds were supposedly stolen. Her account matches the other witnesses' stories, but there's something about the way she speaks. A hesitation, a nervousness that seems out of place. Alejandro's heart skips a beat. He knows that this woman is lying, but how could he prove it? Judge Salazar, of course, shows no mercy. So now we have a new witness who claims to have seen Mr. Lopez at the scene of the crime. How convenient. He sneers, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of having caught Alejandro in another lie. Tell us, Mr. Lopez, what do you have to say about this new witness? Alejandro stands up, his voice steady. I don't know this woman, Your Honor. I was not at the office that night. She is mistaken, or worse, she has been manipulated into lying. The judge raises an eyebrow. Manipulated? That's quite the accusation, Mr. Lopez. Do you have any evidence to back it up? Alejandro clenches his fists, fighting the frustration that bubbles up inside him. No, Your Honor, but I know the truth. I wasn't there. The room grows tense. The audience watches intently, waiting for some dramatic revelation. The judge, however, only looks more convinced than ever that Alejandro is guilty. Then something strange happens. A juror, a woman sitting near the front, leans over to speak quietly to the person next to her. Alejandro catches the faintest whisper, something about her doubts, her questions about the witness's credibility. For a fleeting moment, Alejandro allows himself to hope. Could it be that the tide is beginning to turn? But as quickly as the thought comes, it fades, replaced by a sense of dread. The woman's testimony could still be enough to convict him. He has no way of disproving her claims. His heart sinks as the prosecution calls for a recess and the jurors file out of the room to deliberate. Alejandro remains seated, his mind racing. He can't shake the feeling that something is off about this entire trial. The false witnesses, the fabricated evidence. It all feels like a setup, but who is behind it? And why? He glances over at Laura Ruiz, his defense attorney, who sits beside him, deep in thought. She looks as though she's weighing her options, strategizing for the next move. Alejandro knows she's doing everything she can, but it's not enough. Not yet. When the jurors return, they are silent, their faces unreadable. The tension in the room is suffocating. Judge Salazar's gaze flickers briefly over the jury before he turns to Alejandro with that same condescending look. It seems we've reached a point of uncertainty, the judge says, almost as if to taunt him. But we are not here to make guesses, Mr. Lopez. We are here to find the truth, whether you like it or not. Alejandro can feel the weight of the judge's words bearing down on him. This trial is not just about his innocence, it's about exposing the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. He takes a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever comes next. As the jury deliberates, Alejandro's thoughts drift back to the people who have always believed in him. His family, his friends, the people he's helped over the years. They know the real Alejandro. They know who he is. And that knowledge is what keeps him going, even when the entire world seems to be against him. The courtroom is silent again, the weight of the moment hanging in the air like a thick fog. Alejandro doesn't know what will happen next, but one thing is clear. He is not giving up. The trial drags on, the courtroom growing colder by the day. Alejandro's resolve, however, remains steadfast. Each false witness, every bit of mockery from Judge Salazar, only strengthens his determination to prove the truth. Yet, despite his unwavering calm, a nagging feeling of helplessness settles within him. The evidence against him continues to pile up, and the lies begin to feel more and more like solid bricks in a wall that is closing in around him. One afternoon, as the trial reaches a particularly heated point, something happens that Alejandro never anticipated. A figure enters the courtroom, one that none of the attorneys, the judge, or the spectators had expected. The doors swing open, and in steps a well-known and respected attorney, Ricardo Mendoza. A renowned lawyer with a reputation for defending the wrongly accused, Mendoza is a figure who commands respect, both in and out of the courtroom. His presence is so unexpected that even Judge Salazar briefly falters, his eyes narrowing in surprise as the lawyer makes his way to the defense table. Your Honor, Mendoza's voice rings clear, calm, and assured. I request to be added to the defense team. The room falls into stunned silence. Alejandro can hardly believe his ears. Mendoza, one of the top defense lawyers in the country, is offering to help him. What could have caused him to come forward in the middle of this trial? Judge Salazar's gaze flickers with annoyance, but he quickly regains his composure. And why would you want to take on this case, Mr. Mendoza? Surely you know it's a lost cause. Mendoza doesn't flinch at the judge's sarcastic tone. Because I believe the truth is being buried, Your Honor, and I won't stand by and let that happen. For a moment, it feels as though time has stopped. Alejandro stares at Mendoza, unsure of what to say. How could a lawyer of this caliber take such an interest in his case? But in that moment, something shifts inside him. Perhaps there is a chance for the truth to be revealed after all. The judge hesitates before allowing Mendoza to join the defense. Very well, he grumbles, waving his hand dismissively. But make it quick. This trial is dragging on far too long already. Mendoza takes his place beside Laura Ruiz, and Alejandro watches as the two lawyers exchange a brief but determined look. There is no time to waste. Mendoza quickly surveys the case files, his sharp eyes scanning each page with precision. Without missing a beat, he stands up and addresses the court. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been reviewing the evidence presented by the prosecution, and I believe there's been a crucial oversight. Mendoza begins. His voice is measured, but there's a confidence in it that immediately commands attention. The prosecution lawyer rises to object, but Mendoza calmly waves him off. The evidence against Alejandro Lopez is flimsy at best, and based on testimony from witnesses who are either mistaken or have been coerced into lying. His words hang in the air like a bombshell, and the courtroom shifts uncomfortably. Judge Salazar raises an eyebrow. Coerced? Do you have proof of that, Mr. Mendoza? Mendoza turns his attention to the judge, his face unwavering. Not yet, but I will soon enough. He then motions for a new piece of evidence, a piece that had been overlooked by the prosecution, a set of bank statements that had been considered irrelevant by the initial defense team. These documents, however, tell a very different story. They show that the funds in question had been transferred to an account belonging to someone else entirely, someone with a known history of financial crimes. The prosecutor's face goes pale. That's not possible, he mutters, but there's no denying the evidence now laid bare in front of him. Mendoza stands tall, a quiet smile playing at the edges of his lips. I suggest we take a closer look at the man who actually committed the crime, Your Honor. The prosecution stumbles, visibly shaken. The once confident attorney now looks rattled, unsure of how to proceed. Mendoza's intervention has cast doubt on everything they've built against Alejandro, and the room is buzzing with questions. Alejandro watches in awe, his heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and hope. He had been prepared to fight alone, but now, with Mendoza's help, he feels something change within him. For the first time in the trial, he sees a sliver of light, proof that the truth is not as far out of reach as it seemed. Mendoza's words echo in the courtroom as he sits down. The truth will come to light, Your Honor, and when it does, we'll know who is really guilty. The judge, clearly unsettled by the sudden turn of events, takes a moment before responding. We shall see, Mr. Mendoza. We shall see. With that, the defense rests its case for the day, and the courtroom is left to digest the shockwaves of the new evidence. Alejandro, his chest tight with anticipation, can hardly believe what has just transpired. Could this be the beginning of the end of his nightmare? With Mendoza now on his side, he feels a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the truth will finally be heard. The following day, the courtroom is alive with tension. The walls, which had once seemed oppressive and suffocating, now feel slightly more breathable, perhaps because of the unexpected turn the trial has taken. Mendoza's intervention has shifted the momentum, but Alejandro knows the battle is far from over. The prosecution is scrambling, trying to figure out how to spin the newly revealed evidence, but Alejandro can see the cracks forming in their case. Judge Salazar, still skeptical but clearly rattled, calls the trial to order. The morning begins with the defense presenting new evidence, security footage that hadn't been considered before. The footage shows Alejandro, in full view of the security cameras, entering a building on the night of the supposed crime, but it also shows him leaving long before the crime even took place. It's a crucial piece of evidence that directly contradicts the testimony of the previous witnesses. As the footage plays, the courtroom falls silent. The faces of the jurors, once filled with judgment and certainty, now betray a flicker of doubt. The image on the screen is clear. Alejandro is in a different part of the city during the time the crime occurred. The timeline doesn't add up. Mendoza rises and addresses the court. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see from this footage, Alejandro Lopez was not at the scene of the crime. The evidence against him was fabricated. This is the truth. The question now is, who is responsible for making these false accusations? The prosecutor, looking flustered and on edge, stands up to object. This footage is irrelevant. It doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have tampered with the security system. Mendoza doesn't back down. Let's be clear, Mr. Ramos. The security footage comes from a system that is regularly audited. It's authentic. And more importantly, it proves that Alejandro could not have committed the crime. Judge Salazar, who had been silent throughout the exchange, leans forward, his face unreadable. Mr. Mendoza, this footage is indeed a revelation. But I must ask you, what about the witnesses? What about the financial records that were presented? Are you saying all of that is a lie? Mendoza turns to the judge, his expression stern. Your Honor, the financial records were manipulated. We have already established that. And the witnesses, well, they're not as reliable as they first appeared. One of them has already recanted, and the others have provided inconsistent testimonies. The truth is, there was a concerted effort to frame Mr. Lopez for a crime he didn't commit. The judge doesn't respond immediately. He looks at the footage again, his lips pressed into a tight line. It's clear that the evidence is beginning to crack his previously unshakable confidence in the case against Alejandro. The room grows quieter, the weight of the moment sinking in. Even the prosecution seems to recognize that their once rock-solid case is now teetering. Alejandro's heart races as he watches the events unfold before him. Could it be? Could the truth finally be coming to light? Then something unexpected happens. One of the jurors, a woman who had been sitting quietly throughout the trial, raises her hand. The room goes still as she stands and walks toward the witness stand. Her voice is calm, but filled with conviction. I have been following this case closely, she begins, and I have to say there are too many inconsistencies. The evidence against Mr. Lopez doesn't make sense, and I believe the real culprit is still out there. I've seen enough to know that Alejandro is not guilty. A murmur spreads through the room. Alejandro can hardly believe what he's hearing. For the first time, someone is speaking up, not just in his defense, but with a conviction that matches his own. Judge Salazar looks at the juror, his face hardening, but he says nothing. The room is filled with the collective breath of anticipation. The momentum has shifted, and now the question is, how will the judge respond? After a long pause, Salazar finally speaks. We will take a recess. The jury will deliberate on this new evidence and the statements presented. His voice, though still authoritative, lacks the usual sharpness. For the first time in the trial, there is uncertainty in his tone. As the courtroom empties for the recess, Alejandro stands, his body tense with anticipation. The pieces of the puzzle are slowly falling into place. With each passing moment, the truth inches closer to being revealed, but there is still a long road ahead. Alejandro knows that this is not the time to let his guard down. There's more at stake now than ever before. For the first time, however, he allows himself to feel something he hasn't allowed in weeks: hope. The tension in the courtroom is palpable as the jury returns from their deliberations. Alejandro can feel every pair of eyes on him, the weight of judgment still hanging in the air. The truth is close now, but it's not in his hands. It's in the hands of the jurors, who will determine whether justice will prevail or whether they'll fall victim to the lies that have plagued this trial from the start. Judge Salazar sits at the bench, his eyes narrowing as he surveys the room. He looks at Alejandro, then at the jury, his expression unreadable. Has the jury reached a verdict? He asks, his voice cutting through the thick silence. The jury foreman rises, a man who had been quiet throughout most of the trial. His hands tremble slightly as he holds the piece of paper that will determine Alejandro's fate. We have, Your Honor, the foreman announces. Alejandro's heart races in his chest, his breath shallow. He looks around the room at the faces of the jurors. Some appear conflicted, others resolute. He knows this moment will decide everything. The judge nods for the foreman to continue. We, the jury, find the defendant, Alejandro Lopez, not guilty of the charges against him. The words hit Alejandro like a tidal wave, and for a moment everything goes still. It's as though the room has been frozen in time. His body is frozen, his mind racing to process what he's just heard. Not guilty. The weight of the accusation has been lifted from him, but the relief doesn't come all at once. There's still too much to absorb. The judge's gavel strikes the desk with a loud crack, shattering the stillness. The defendant is free to go, Judge Salazar declares, his voice harsh and final. Alejandro stands there, still rooted to the spot, as if the words haven't fully reached him. Then slowly he begins to move. His body feels heavy, as though he's walking through water, but he takes slow, deliberate steps toward the exit. The truth has been revealed, but the journey to this point has left scars that he knows will take time to heal. As Alejandro walks past the prosecution's table, he notices the faces of the attorneys who had been so certain of his guilt. Their expressions are a mixture of disbelief and defeat. For a brief moment, he meets the gaze of the prosecutor, who had been relentless in his pursuit of Alejandro's conviction. The man looks away quickly, unable to meet Alejandro's eyes. But Alejandro doesn't feel anger, only a quiet, solemn sense of justice. The crowd in the courtroom begins to murmur, and some spectators even start to applaud, though the sound is subdued, almost hesitant. Alejandro doesn't turn to face them. Instead, he keeps his gaze fixed ahead, his thoughts on the journey that lies beyond this courtroom. Once outside, the weight of the fresh air hits him. It feels like freedom, but it's a freedom tinged with sorrow. The damage done by the lies, by the people who had sought to destroy him, can never be fully undone. He looks up at the sky, the clouds moving slowly above him, as if reflecting the chaos that has swirled in his life for the past few weeks. But then something unexpected happens. Laura Ruiz, his attorney, catches up to him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "You did it, Alejandro," she says, her voice soft but filled with pride. Alejandro turns to her, his face still numb from the trial. "No, we did it. You and Mendoza. Without you, this wouldn't have been possible." Laura smiles faintly. "You never gave up. That's what made the difference. You fought for the truth no matter what." Alejandro nods, his lips trembling slightly, as the weight of the moment begins to sink in. "I was afraid of what they would do to me, but in the end, I knew I couldn't let them win." As they stand together in the courtyard, Alejandro's phone rings. It's a message from an unknown number. He opens it and his heart skips a beat as he reads the contents. "We know who really committed the crime. We'll make sure the truth is known." His fingers tremble as he looks at the message, the words sending a chill down his spine. The truth has come to light in the courtroom, but there's still more to uncover, more to be revealed. Alejandro knows that the battle isn't over. This is just the beginning. But for the first time in what feels like forever, he feels the stirrings of something deeper within him. Justice. He turns to Laura, his eyes filled with new determination. The real criminal is still out there, and we're going to find them. The days following Alejandro's acquittal are a blur. The relief of being declared innocent is still fresh, but the questions linger in his mind. The message he received after the trial was a haunting reminder that the true criminal had not yet been found. As he moves forward in his life, the sense of justice he fought so hard to protect feels incomplete, tainted by the shadow of the real culprit still at large. Alejandro spends his days working, trying to return to a sense of normalcy, but the weight of the unanswered questions gnaws at him. He can't help but wonder why anyone would target him, what he did to deserve such an elaborate setup. Yet amidst all the chaos, there's a new sense of clarity forming inside him. The truth may have been uncovered in the courtroom, but Alejandro knows that there's still work to be done. His sense of justice demands that he take the next step, even if it means uncovering something darker than he could ever have imagined. One morning, as he's walking down the street, a familiar figure approaches him. It's Judge Ricardo Salazar. Alejandro stops, surprised. He hadn't expected to see the man again, let alone in such a personal setting. Salazar's face is strained, his eyes unusually soft, as though the events of the past few weeks have affected him in ways he never anticipated. "Mr. Lopez," Judge Salazar begins, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I wanted to apologize for everything." Alejandro stands there, taken aback. He hadn't expected an apology from the man who had so openly ridiculed him during the trial, who had been quick to believe the worst in him. The judge, a symbol of authority, had once been the very embodiment of the system that Alejandro thought had failed him. "I know it won't change what happened," Salazar continues, his voice cracking slightly, "but I need you to know that I was wrong. I judged you harshly, and I let my bias cloud my judgment. I didn't see you as a person, just a defendant, and for that, I am truly sorry." Alejandro feels a lump form in his throat, the weight of the judge's words settling heavily in the space between them. It's not an apology he expected, nor one he thought he needed, but in that moment he realizes that this is more than just about him. It's about something bigger. "It's okay," Alejandro replies quietly. "You weren't the only one. Many people thought the worst of me, but I can't change that, and neither can you. What matters now is that the truth came out. Salazar nods slowly, his eyes meeting Alejandro's with newfound respect. I've spent my entire career believing that the law could never be wrong, that it was always just. But this trial has made me see that the law is only as just as the people who uphold it, and I failed you. I failed to see the truth because I was too quick to judge. Alejandro listens, his heart heavy with a mix of emotions. It's not the closure he expected, but it's a start. In some ways, this conversation is more powerful than the verdict itself. The judge, once a symbol of the system's cold authority, is now acknowledging his mistakes and asking for forgiveness. I don't need your forgiveness, Judge, Alejandro says, his voice steady. What matters is that you're changing. I believe in redemption, in second chances, and maybe that's what you need too. There's a long pause before Salazar speaks again. I have to earn that second chance, Alejandro, but I will, I promise you. The two men stand there in silence, a quiet understanding between them. For a moment, the noise of the world fades away, and it's just the two of them, the defendant and the judge, acknowledging the weight of their shared experience. They've both been on opposite sides of justice, but in this moment they're connected by something deeper, a recognition of human fallibility, of redemption, and of the possibility of change. As Salazar turns to leave, Alejandro watches him go. There's no anger in his heart, only the realization that justice is not always as clear-cut as it seems. Sometimes it takes a change of heart, a willingness to see beyond the surface, to uncover the true meaning of justice. Alejandro takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few weeks slowly lift off his shoulders. The truth has been revealed, and though the road to redemption is long, it's a road that both he and Judge Salazar will now walk, each in their own way. The courtroom is filled with a heavy air of anticipation as the final days of the trial approach. The truth has slowly begun to unravel, and while the evidence presented has been enough to cast significant doubt on the accusations against Alejandro, there is still one major piece missing: the identity of the real criminal. As the defense team prepares for the final round of testimony, Alejandro finds himself sitting in the defendant's chair, his thoughts racing. The truth is on the cusp of being revealed, but there's something else, something deeper that still needs to be addressed. It isn't just about clearing his name. It's about confronting the corruption that has festered behind the scenes, the forces that have manipulated the legal system for their own gain. Judge Salazar, who has shifted from being an indifferent, scornful authority figure to a man torn by his own conscience, watches Alejandro closely. His once hard exterior is now cracked, and it's clear that the events of the trial have shaken him. But today, something is different. Today, the final confrontation is about to unfold. The courtroom falls silent as Mendoza, now Alejandro's lead defense attorney, rises to speak. His voice, usually calm and measured, now carries an undercurrent of fire. Your Honor, members of the court, we have uncovered the truth, and it is not what you have been led to believe. The prosecutor stands up quickly, his face twisted in disbelief. Objection! This is a baseless accusation. There's no evidence to support this wild claim, he shouts. Mendoza calmly waves his hand. No, Mr. Ramos, there is evidence. In fact, the very evidence that has been overlooked this entire trial. And now, we have irrefutable proof of the corruption that runs through this case. A collective gasp echoes through the courtroom as Mendoza motions for the presentation of a new set of documents, hidden financial transactions, emails between high-ranking officials, and a series of threats aimed at Alejandro, all pointing to a conspiracy that stretches far beyond the theft he was accused of. These documents, Mendoza continues, show that the prosecution has not only fabricated the evidence against my client, but has actively sought to destroy his life for reasons unrelated to the charges. Alejandro Lopez was targeted because he was a threat to powerful people who had everything to lose if the truth came out. The prosecution sputters in response, but the damage has been done. The truth has been laid bare, and with it the curtain is pulled back to reveal the puppet strings controlling the trial. There's a collective shift in the room as the gravity of the situation sinks in. Judge Salazar stands up, his eyes narrowed. Mr. Mendoza, he says, his voice firm but tinged with uncertainty, are you suggesting that this court has been manipulated from the start? Mendoza nods. Yes, Your Honor, and it's time we all face the truth. The courtroom is dead silent, the tension almost unbearable. The prosecutor's face turns pale as the weight of the allegations hangs in the air. He's no longer the confident authority he once was. He's a man backed into a corner, facing the unraveling of everything he thought was certain. Alejandro, standing beside his defense team, watches the scene unfold before him. It's the moment he's been waiting for, the moment that he knows will change everything. But there's something else in his heart, something he never expected: compassion. Despite everything that's happened, despite the lies and the manipulation, Alejandro finds it in himself to forgive. He knows that the truth, however painful, will set everyone free, even the ones who sought to destroy him. The judge looks at the prosecutor, then back at Alejandro. There's a long pause before he speaks again, his voice quieter than before. I didn't know. I thought I was upholding the law, but this..." His words falter, as if he himself is struggling to accept what's been revealed. "Mr. Lopez, I made a mistake. I judged you before knowing the truth, and for that I am truly sorry." Alejandro doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he just nods, the weight of the moment settling over him. It's not about revenge. It's not about punishment. It's about the truth. And in that truth there is healing. Part 2. The unexpected turn. 700 words. The room remains silent for what feels like an eternity. The judge, who had once been so confident in his own authority, is now a broken man, forced to confront the reality of his own role in the miscarriage of justice. The prosecutor, who had so vehemently tried to destroy Alejandro's life, stands with his head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And Alejandro, he stands there still, his heart racing but his mind clear. This moment has taken everything from him, but it has also given him something new. It has given him a peace he never expected. Judge Salazar, still grappling with the weight of his own mistake, finally speaks, his voice heavy. The court will resume after a brief recess. The jury will be informed of these new developments. He slams his gavel down with more force than necessary, but it doesn't carry the same authority it once had. There's no victory in this for anyone, just the bitter taste of truth. As the courtroom empties for the recess, Alejandro stays seated at the defense table, surrounded by his lawyers. They don't say much. They don't need to. The truth is all that matters now. For the first time in a long while, Alejandro feels a glimmer of hope, not just for himself, but for the system that almost failed him. When the trial reconvenes, the atmosphere has shifted. The jury, though still processing the new evidence, is clearly moved. The prosecution's case has collapsed, and with it the credibility of everyone involved in the conspiracy against Alejandro. The foreman of the jury rises, the look on his face solemn but resolute. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Alejandro Lopez, not guilty of all charges," he announces. The words are a weight lifted, but they are also bittersweet. Alejandro stands up, his legs slightly unsteady as he steps toward the center of the courtroom. For a moment, the entire room is still, watching him, waiting. Then, Alejandro speaks, his voice clear and strong. "Justice has been done, but let us not forget that true justice is not just about what happens in this room. It's about how we treat each other outside of it. It's about seeing the truth even when it's difficult to look at." He turns to Judge Salazar, who stands at the bench, his face etched with regret. "I forgive you," Alejandro says softly, "but the work of healing has only just begun." Judge Salazar nods, the apology still heavy in his heart. "Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I will do better. I promise." The gavel falls one last time, signaling the end of a long and painful chapter in Alejandro's life. But as he walks out of the courtroom, free at last, he knows that the real work, the work of ensuring the truth is never silenced again, has just begun. Alejandro steps out of the courthouse, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding him as he takes in the fresh air. The weight of the past weeks, the lies, the accusations, and the court's scrutiny all seem to dissipate in an instant. The truth has won. His name has been cleared. But the journey that led him here, the internal struggle and emotional toll, will take much longer to heal. As he walks down the steps, his eyes scanning the crowd gathered outside, he feels a strange mix of relief and sadness. He's no longer a man bound by false accusations, but the scars of the battle remain. What he's gained, his freedom, has come at a cost. There's no easy way to forget the pain and betrayal, but Alejandro knows one thing for certain: he won't let it define him. Behind him, Judge Salazar stands, watching him go. The judge's posture is different now. no longer the towering figure of authority who passed judgment so easily. Instead, Salazar is a man changed, humbled by his own mistakes, by the revelations of the case, and by the undeniable truth that now looms over everything. Alejandro stops for a moment, turning back toward the judge. Their eyes meet. Without a word, Alejandro nods, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The judge may have failed him once, but in this moment, it's clear that something in both of them has shifted. There's no easy road ahead, but there's a new possibility for redemption, for change, for growth. As Alejandro steps into the future, free from the chains of a wrongful conviction, he knows the journey to healing has only just begun. But he has learned one powerful lesson, that no matter how dark the road, the truth, when uncovered, has the power to set us all free.